Washington, D.C., America's seat of power, the city of decisions that ripple across the world. It's a city prepared for the storm, but the intensity isn't in the Capitol building or the marble monuments. It's in the streets, in the faces of people, and in the voices of those who feel that, in this moment, history is being written by them. Across the city, there's a strange energy in the air, a tension, a sense that something big is coming. And for once, the spotlight isn't on the politicians, but on the voters, each carrying their reasons, each bringing their own hopes and fears to the polls. This election isn't business as usual. People aren't just voting for a candidate. They're voting on issues that define their lives. You can feel it in the crowds. Women marching for their rights, immigrants calling for recognition, young voters casting their first ballots. Washington is brimming with voices, real people who aren't just waiting for change. They're demanding it. The question isn't about who's prepared to win, it's about who will be the voice for the causes they care about most. Every vote feels like a small rebellion, a refusal to back down. And for so many, these votes carry a sense of urgency. Each issue seems life-altering, and for good reason. Whether it's the future of abortion rights or the fate of immigrants in this country, voters in this city and across the nation are coming to the polls with decisions that will impact their lives in real ways. There's something undeniably powerful about it, this sense that ordinary people have the chance to shape history. And in 2024, these are the issues they're fighting for. 1. Abortion rights. It's one of the most heated debates in America, but this year it's more than just a policy issue. It's a battle over freedom, autonomy, and the right to make deeply personal decisions. This story begins decades ago in 1973 with the Supreme Court's ruling in Roe v. Wade, which granted American women the right to abortion. For nearly 50 years, that ruling stood firm, and generations of women grew up with that right embedded in the fabric of American life. Then came 2022, a year that changed everything. The Supreme Court overturned Roe v. Wade, stripping away federal protection for abortion rights and putting the power back into the hands of individual states. For some, this was a victory for states' rights, but for millions of women, it felt like a betrayal. It was a decision that fractured the country, creating a patchwork of laws that now decide a woman's fate based on where she lives. Imagine that living in one state grants you control over your body, while crossing a border means losing that right. Take Washington, D.C., for example, where abortion is accessible throughout all stages of pregnancy. Contrast that with Texas, where abortion is illegal unless the mother's life is in immediate danger. Picture the stark difference. Two women, same country, but worlds apart. And that's not just theoretical, it's the reality facing millions of Americans right now. In 17 states, abortion is outright banned. Some of these states allow narrow exceptions, but even those are subject to conditions and restrictions. In 8 more states, abortion is heavily limited. Meanwhile, polls show that about 66% of Americans believe abortion should be legal. But for many, that belief isn't enough. Their right to decide is gone, their autonomy overridden by state lines. As we enter the final stretch of the election, abortion rights aren't just a talking point, they're a defining issue. For millions, this is about the most basic form of freedom, and they're not letting it slip away without a fight. Young women, especially those under 30, are more passionate than ever, rallying, marching, and making their voices heard. They're showing up in unprecedented numbers, driven by a desire to reclaim what they feel has been unjustly taken from them. This isn't just a political battle, it's a deeply personal one. For them, this election is about fighting for control over their own bodies, their own choices, and ultimately, their own futures. Kamala Harris has promised to fight for these rights if elected. She's made it clear that protecting reproductive freedom is a priority for her campaign. But she's not without critics. Some point out that she was part of the administration in power when Roe v. Wade was overturned. Others question if her promises are just words, especially given that her predecessor, Joe Biden, has often held a quieter stance on abortion, influenced by his Catholic beliefs. So the question remains, will Kamala Harris be any different? Then there's Donald Trump. He appointed the Supreme Court justices who ultimately overturned Roe v. Wade, a fact that's not lost on voters. Trump has publicly supported state-level control over abortion, arguing that the federal government shouldn't interfere. But recently, he's dialed back his rhetoric, even hinting that he wouldn't pursue a nationwide abortion ban if re-elected. He's called himself the father of IVF, promoting a softer image. But can voters really trust this change of tone? Or is this just another political maneuver to win over moderate voters? In swing states where the outcome often hinges on a razor-thin margin, abortion could be the deciding factor. Women, especially young women, see this issue as a matter of personal freedom, and for many, it overrides other concerns like inflation or even national security. They're not just hoping for change, they're demanding it. As the final days of campaigning unfold, one thing is clear. Abortion rights are more than just a point on a candidate's agenda. They're a battle cry, a demand for respect, and a reminder that for many Americans, this election is as personal as it gets. 2. Immigration has always been a hot topic in America, but this year, it's not just a debate about borders, it's about belonging, identity, and what it truly means to be part of this country. For some, immigration is a tale of opportunity and dreams fulfilled. For others, it's a challenge to the very fabric of the nation. But in a small city just outside Washington, D.C., immigration takes on a unique significance. Tacoma Park, Maryland, a place where non-U.S. citizens, including undocumented immigrants, are allowed to vote in local elections. It's an unusual policy, one that started back in 1993, with the idea that if you're living, working, and paying taxes in a community, you deserve a voice in local government. And now, with a new candidate on the scene, the issue of immigration is back in the spotlight. Umbrio Agosi, who's running to represent Ward 6 in Tacoma Park, believes deeply in the right of non-citizens to vote. He's reaching out to communities from every background, knocking on doors, handing out pamphlets, and making his case. To him, it's simple. People who live here, who build the city, should have a say in how it's run. But this isn't a sentiment shared by everyone. Many Republicans, led by Donald Trump, see this as a dangerous path. They argue that only citizens should have the right to vote, that allowing non-citizens a say in local government is a slippery slope. Trump has been vocal, promising to end sanctuary cities like Tacoma Park, arguing that America's resources and protections should be reserved for citizens. His supporters agree, echoing a message of nationalism and control. They see immigration, particularly illegal immigration, as a threat to jobs, safety, and stability. For families who have come to America seeking a better life, this rhetoric is alarming. Many immigrants, especially those undocumented, live in fear of what a Trump victory could mean. Trump's promise to launch the largest deportation campaign in history looms large. Imagine the weight of that threat hanging over families who have built their lives here, raised their children, contributed to their communities. It's a fear that's hard to shake, and for many, it means voting in this election is a matter of survival. The Democrats, too, have a stake in the immigration debate. They've historically promised to create pathways to citizenship, to protect dreamers, and to reform a system that many agree is broken. But even among Democrats, opinions vary. Some believe that the right to vote should be a privilege reserved for citizens, while others argue for inclusivity and representation for all. The concept of non-citizen voting is still highly controversial, with Republicans calling it a clear and present danger to American democracy. In places like Tacoma Park, the stakes are high. Immigrants are an essential part of the community, and for many, voting locally is the only way to have a say in the decisions that affect their lives. But across the country, opinions on immigration vary widely. Some Americans worry about job competition, while others argue that immigrants are an essential part of the economy, filling roles that keep communities functioning. As the election approaches, immigration is no longer just about policy. It's about identity. Are immigrants who live and work in the U.S. part of the community, or are they outsiders? And who has the right to decide? For many voters, these questions are at the heart of the election, and they're looking for answers, not just promises. 3. Arab and Jewish American voter influence. In this election, the influence of Arab and Jewish Americans goes beyond mere numbers. These communities, often tied to the complex dynamics of Middle Eastern politics, carry a weight that can sway the results in tightly contested swing states. Their voices, rooted in personal histories, struggles, and deeply held beliefs, may well shape America's political future. And right now, that influence is teetering in unexpected directions. Arab Americans, 3.7 million strong, have traditionally aligned with the Democratic Party. But this time, the winds are shifting. The reason? The war in Gaza. For many Arab Americans, this conflict is personal. It's a story of family and friends caught in a crisis, of a homeland facing devastation. Many feel that the current administration has done little to advocate for peace, that promises made during the 2020 election have fallen flat. And this disillusionment is pushing some toward Donald Trump, a candidate they once viewed with caution, if not disdain. For these voters, Trump isn't necessarily a symbol of hope, but he represents something else, a chance to punish the Democrats, to hold them accountable for promises unkept. It's a reluctant loyalty at best, a calculated shift rather than a wholehearted endorsement. To these voters, the decision is about pushing back, about showing the Democrats that their support can no longer be taken for granted. Arab Americans feel that they've been ignored, even abandoned by the party that once promised to stand with them. For some, this election is a last chance to make their voices heard, to demand that their concerns be taken seriously. On the other side of this spectrum stand Jewish Americans. With a population of 5.8 million, they've historically been a reliable base for the Democrats, despite Trump's strong pro-Israel policies, such as his controversial decision to move the U.S. Embassy from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem. Trump has tried to appeal to Jewish voters, meeting with Israeli leaders, claiming unwavering support for Israel, and even accusing Kamala Harris of being anti-Jewish, despite her marriage to a Jewish man. But still, Jewish Americans largely stand with the Democrats. Why? For many, it comes down to values. The Jewish American community has long aligned itself with liberal ideals, prioritizing issues like social justice, economic equality, and anti-discrimination policies. These values run deep, and they remain a driving force for many Jewish voters, despite Trump's pro-Israel stance. But there's another factor at play: safety. Over the past few years, anti-Semitic incidents have surged. Some blame Trump's rhetoric for emboldening extremist factions, and for these voters, safety isn't something they can overlook. In swing states like Michigan and Pennsylvania, this divide could tip the scales. Arab Americans, who once leaned heavily toward the Democrats, are now shifting, driven by a sense of betrayal and a longing for peace in the Middle East. Jewish Americans, on the other hand, are standing firm with the Democrats, prioritizing their values and safety above all else. This election, then, is more than a choice between Trump and Harris. For Arab and Jewish Americans, it's a reckoning with the parties that claim to represent them. Can they trust the Democrats to support peace in the Middle East? Can they rely on the Republicans to uphold their values and protect their communities? These questions are as personal as they are political, and the answers may be written in the ballots of two communities that could decide the fate of a nation. 4. Indian American voter shift. Indian Americans have always been seen as the model minority, a community celebrated for its economic contributions and high rates of success. But in this election, they're stepping out of that stereotype and into the political spotlight, not as a monolithic bloc, but as a complex, powerful, and, in many ways, divided voting group. With 5.2 million Indian Americans in the U.S. and 2.6 million of them eligible to vote, both parties are keenly aware that this community could very well hold the key to victory in certain swing states. Historically, Indian Americans have leaned Democratic. They're attracted to the party's emphasis on diversity, inclusion, and pathways to citizenship. And with Kamala Harris, the daughter of an Indian immigrant, at the forefront, the Democrats have made a concerted effort to capture this community's support. For months, Harris has reached out to Indian American voters, using slogans like "Desis Decide" and "Desis Vote," even enlisting high-profile Indian American celebrities to campaign for her. It's an all-out push, one that speaks to the importance of this demographic in an election this close. So what's driving this shift? For many Indian Americans, the issue is immigration. This may seem surprising given that many are immigrants themselves, but it's precisely because of their experiences that some Indian Americans are reconsidering their loyalties. Take Fairfax County, Virginia, a prosperous area where many Indian immigrants have settled. These are people who came to the U.S. legally, who waited years for citizenship, who worked hard to establish themselves. They've endured the bureaucracy, the wait lists, the setbacks, and they feel a strong sense of pride in having earned their place in America. Now, as they watch a steady influx of undocumented immigrants crossing the border, some feel that their own sacrifices have been overlooked. For these voters, the Democrats' stance on immigration seems like a betrayal. Why, they ask, should those who haven't followed the legal process be given benefits that they had to work so hard to earn? For these Indian Americans, Trump's promise of a stricter immigration policy isn't just appealing. It feels like justice. It's a perspective rooted in personal experience, in the years spent navigating the immigration system and waiting for the opportunity to become citizens. And in this election, that experience is driving many to reconsider their support for the Democrats. It's not that they necessarily align with Trump on every issue, but on this issue, they feel he understands them. At the same time, not all Indian Americans share this perspective. For many, especially younger voters and those who came to America more recently, the Democrats still represent the values they hold dear: diversity, inclusion, and the promise of a better life for immigrants. They admire Kamala Harris for her heritage, for what she represents, and for the progress she embodies. The Indian American community, then, is not a single voting bloc. It's a complex, nuanced group with a range of views and values. But in an election this close, even a slight shift in loyalty could swing critical states. As both parties vie for their votes, Indian Americans find themselves in a unique position, no longer just a model minority, but a powerful, influential voice that could help determine the future of American politics. The clock is ticking, the days are dwindling, and soon millions of Americans will cast their votes, deciding not just who will sit in the White House, but the very direction the country will take for years to come. As we look back at the issues that have dominated this election, abortion rights, immigration, the shifting loyalties of minority communities, one thing becomes clear. This election is about more than policies. It's about who we are as a country, who we want to be, and what values we hold dear. For some, this election is a battle for personal freedom, for autonomy, for control over their own bodies. For others, it's about securing the future, about making sure that the country's borders are respected, that the immigrants who have made their lives here are treated with fairness and dignity. And still, for many, it's about holding politicians accountable, whether it's the Democrats, who have failed to deliver on promises made to their communities, or the Republicans, whose extreme policies leave many feeling uncertain and unsafe. As we stand on the edge of this historic moment, the question is, which issues will tip the balance? Abortion rights, immigration policies, the fate of vulnerable communities like Arab Americans, Jewish Americans, or Indian Americans. Each of these groups has faced its own challenges over the years, and in this election, their concerns are no longer being swept under the rug. The voices of women demanding reproductive rights, of immigrants fighting for respect, of religious and ethnic communities questioning their place in a divided America, these voices are all louder than ever before. And in this election, they will be heard. But what happens when the issues that matter most are the ones that divide us the most? The battle for abortion rights, the fight over immigration, and the deeply personal feelings of betrayal from communities once loyal to the Democratic Party? These aren't just policy debates. These are life and death decisions for millions of Americans. These issues determine not only who will govern, but who will be heard, who will be seen, and who will have the right to shape their own future. The key to this election isn't just the candidates, it's the issues that have ignited a fire in the hearts of millions. And those issues, those deeply held beliefs and passions, are what will ultimately determine the outcome. In the coming days, as voters head to the polls, their choices will be guided by what they feel is at stake, not just for them, but for the country. Because in a country this divided, there's no room for indifference. Every vote counts, every decision matters. And so, as we head into the final stretch of this election, the real question is not just who will win, but what this election will mean for the future of America. Will the battle for abortion rights be the deciding factor? Will the fear of unchecked immigration tip the scales? Will the frustration of once loyal minority communities turn the tide? These are the questions that will shape the outcome, and the answers will determine not just the next president, but the direction this country takes in the years to come. As voters cast their ballots, as campaigns come to a close, remember, this isn't just an election. This is a turning point, a moment when history will remember the choices made in the face of a divided nation. And with that, the stakes have never been higher. If you found this breakdown insightful and the issues explored worth discussing, make sure to like, share, and subscribe. Your voice matters, and we want to hear your thoughts. What issues do you think will define this election? Leave a comment below and join the conversation.